The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Every voice in the longhouse went silent. Every head turned. And Gemma Birchwood, standing barefoot on the worn timber floor with her chin raised and her fists clenched at her sides, felt the entire world narrow to a single point. The stranger at the back of the hall who had just claimed her in front of 300 witnesses. She didn't know his name yet. She would. That morning, the Marshes had been kind. Gemma woke before dawn in her cottage at the water's edge, the way she always did. Alone, with the fog pressing against the windows like something alive. The air tasted of peat and wet reed, and somewhere beneath the raised wooden floor, the soft lap of shallow water kept its patient rhythm. She dressed without thinking. Dark rust wool bodice laced over a cream linen shift, the sleeves long enough to cover the thin scar on her left wrist where a snake bite had nearly taken her hand 3 summers ago. Leather belt, copper buckle. A bundle of dried yarrow tucked against her hip because old habits were harder to break than bones, and Gemma had broken plenty of both. The autumn gathering was today. She'd known it was coming the way you know a storm is coming. Not because anyone told you, but because the air changes. For 3 weeks, the Elder Council had sent messengers along the raised walkways to her door. Polite at first, then pointed. Then Silas Croft himself had come, leaning on his gold-topped walking staff, his iron-gray eyes flat and patient above the heavy bronze chain of office that hung across his chest. "You are 24, Gemma, unmated. The law is clear. The law says I have until the gathering to choose. And if you don't?" She hadn't answered. She hadn't needed to. They both knew the words carved into the ancient timber above the longhouse entrance. Choose or be chosen. No wolf walks alone. Gemma had no intention of choosing. She also had no intention of being chosen. Her plan, such as it was, involved attending the gathering, enduring the ceremony, and walking out before the final horn, technically present, technically in compliance, and technically still free by morning. It was not a good plan. She knew that, but it was hers. The walkway to the longhouse swayed gently beneath her boots as she crossed the marsh. Mist clung to the reeds in thick white ribbons, and the lanterns on their tall poles were still lit from the night before, their glow amber and hazy in the fog. Other pack members moved along parallel walkways, families in their gathering clothes, children running ahead on the narrow planks with the reckless confidence of those who'd grown up over water. Gemma walked alone. The longhouse rose out of the marsh like something ancient had surfaced and decided to stay. Massive timber beams, dark with age and smoke. A roof thatched so thick it swallowed sound. The great doors stood open, and the central fire pit was already burning, sending a column of smoke up through the opening in the roof where pale morning sky showed through. Inside, the hall was full. Long benches lined the walls. The Elder Council sat at the far end on a raised platform. Silas Croft at the center, his black fur-trimmed robe arranged carefully around him, the gold-topped staff planted between his feet. His son, Declan, sat at his right hand, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, with the kind of uncomplicated confidence that came from never having been told no. Gemma felt Declan's gaze land on her the moment she stepped through the door. She didn't look at him. She found a spot near the back, close to the exit, and pressed her spine against the timber wall. The gathering horn sounded. Silas rose. He spoke about tradition, about the strength of the pack, about the sacred duty of mating bonds and the bloodlines that sustain their people. His voice was measured, practiced, the cadence of a man who had been shaping this moment for months. Gemma's hands were steady. Her pulse was not. The unmated females of age will now come forward. 3 women stepped into the center aisle. Gemma didn't move. Gemma Birchwood. Silas's iron gaze found her in the back of the hall. "You will come forward." She pushed off the wall, walked the length of the longhouse with her chin up and her boots striking the timber in a rhythm that felt like defiance, because it was. She took her place at the end of the line and stared straight ahead. The matched males were presented. Pack warriors mostly. Good men, probably. Gemma didn't care. She watched the ceremony with the detached focus of someone counting the minutes until she could leave. Then Silas spoke again. As is tradition, visiting dignitaries may observe or participate in the claiming. We are honored to welcome a guest from the Northern Territories. Gemma's attention sharpened. She hadn't known there would be outside visitors. That wasn't normal. The autumn gathering was pack business. Internal, private, fiercely guarded. A figure moved at the back of the hall. He'd been standing in the shadows near the door, so still she hadn't noticed him. But now he stepped forward into the firelight, and Gemma's breath caught in her chest like a fishhook had snagged it. He was tall. Not just tall, built with the kind of deliberate, coiled strength that suggested he could move very fast when he needed to. Dark golden hair, thick and tied back at the nape, caught the amber light from the fire pit. His jaw was sharp, set with the quiet patience of someone accustomed to waiting. He wore a heavy charcoal wool tunic with iron clasps, dark leather bracers strapped to both forearms, and a bronze wolf head pin at his shoulder that gleamed dully in the smoke-hazed light. No crown, no insignia, nothing to announce what he was, but Gemma felt it anyway. A pressure in the air, the way the atmosphere shifts before lightning strikes. Every instinct she had went rigid. His eyes swept the hall. Cool slate blue, the color of river stones in winter. They moved across the elder council, the matched pairs, the watching crowd. And then they found her. The world went quiet. Not metaphorically, not poetically. Actually quiet. The crackle of the fire pit vanished. The murmur of 300 voices disappeared. The creak of old timber and the distant lap of marsh water, gone. All of it, swallowed into a silence so complete that Gemma could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her ears, could hear the breath moving in and out of her lungs, could hear, impossibly, the steady drum of his pulse, slow and sure and perfectly out of sync with hers. She stared at him. He stared at her. The silence held. Then Silas's voice cut through, sharp and ceremonial. The unmated Gemma Birchwood has been offered the choice of pack law. She has not yet selected. As is our custom, I will now assign. Done. One word. Low, rough, carrying effortlessly through the entire longhouse. The stranger stepped forward. His slate blue eyes never left Gemma's face. I claim the right of visiting selection. The woman is mine. And that is where we began. The silence that followed his declaration lasted exactly 4 heartbeats. Gemma counted them, her own, hammering against her ribs, and his, impossibly steady through the strange quiet that wrapped around them both like fog. Then the longhouse erupted. Silas was on his feet, the gold-topped staff striking the platform with a crack that rang through the timber. You overstep, stranger. Pack law governs pack matings. You have no authority. I have the right of visiting selection. The stranger's voice was calm, unhurried. He hadn't moved from where he stood, but something in his posture had shifted. A settling, like a predator planting its feet. Your own traditions grant it. I've read your charter. Gemma's mind was racing. Visiting selection. She knew the law. An outside alpha of sufficient rank could claim an unmated pack member during a gathering, provided the claim was made before the council's assignment was finalized. It was ancient, almost never invoked, a relic from a time when packs intermarried across territories for alliances. Silas hadn't finalized the assignment. He'd been about to, but he hadn't spoken the words. Who are you? Silas demanded. The stranger tilted his head slightly. The firelight caught the bronze wolf head pin at his shoulder, and Gemma saw the elders nearest the platform go pale. Bram Casterly, he said, Alpha King of the Northern Reach. The murmur that swept through the longhouse was like wind through reeds. Gemma felt her knees soften and locked them. The Alpha King, in their longhouse, claiming her. Silas's expression didn't crack, but Gemma saw the knuckles whiten around his staff. The Alpha King honors us with his presence, but Pack's sovereignty is preserved. Bram's tone hadn't changed, still calm, still even, still carrying that bedrock certainty that made Gemma's chest ache with something she couldn't name. The claim is legal. The woman hasn't been assigned. And I don't believe she was going to choose willingly. His gaze flicked to Gemma. Something softened at the edges. Were you? Every eye in the longhouse turned to her. Gemma's throat was dry. Her amber eyes held his, and in that strange pocket of silence that surrounded them both, she heard his heartbeat slow even further. Waiting. Patient. No, she said. I wasn't. Bram nodded once, like that was all he needed to hear, and turned back to Silas. Then the matter is settled. Unless you'd like to challenge the claim formally? Silas wouldn't. Gemma knew it before the elder's jaw tightened and released. Challenging the Alpha King's claim would require combat, and whatever Silas was, manipulative, patient, coldly strategic. He was not a fighter. He was a man who moved pieces on a board, not one who bloodied his own hands. The claim is noted, Silas said, each word pulled through his teeth. The council will convene to discuss the formalities. Take your time. Bram's tone was pleasant. His eyes were not. Gemma didn't breathe properly until they were outside. The fog had thinned enough to show the edge of the marsh, reeds standing tall in the pale morning light, the wooden walkways stretching in every direction like veins. Bram walked beside her, not touching, not crowding, just present, and the silence that followed them was not the unnatural quiet of the bond. It was the ordinary silence of two people who didn't know what to say. Gemma spoke first. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. I don't need rescuing. Bram glanced at her. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the barely there shadow of gold stubble along his jaw, the way his slate blue gaze held hers without flinching. I know that too. Then why? He was quiet for a moment. They'd reached a junction in the walkways, and he stopped, hands resting on the rope railing, looking out over the water. The mist curled around his boots. Because I heard you say no, he said. And I watched a room full of people prepare to ignore it. Something cracked in Gemma's chest. Small. Hairline. The kind of fracture you don't notice until the whole wall comes down. She turned away before he could see it. My cottage is this way. If you're staying, you'll need somewhere that isn't the longhouse. Silas controls the guest quarters. Bram followed without argument. Her cottage was small and cluttered with purpose, bundles of drying herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, glass jars lining every flat surface, a work table scarred with knife marks and stained with tinctures. It smelled like rosemary and smoke, and the faint mineral tang of marsh water. The floorboards were worn smooth by years of her feet traveling the same paths, fire to table, table to shelf, shelf to door. Every groove was hers. She was suddenly, fiercely aware of how small the space was with him in it. He ducked beneath the hanging herbs without being asked, shifted sideways to avoid the stack of drying trays near the door, and stood at the edge of her work table with his hands at his sides, making himself as contained as a man his size could manage. It should have felt like an intrusion. It didn't. It felt like the cottage had been holding its breath for years, and someone had finally opened a window. Gemma lit the fire. She didn't offer tea. She stood on one side of her work table and Bram stood on the other, and the silence between them hummed. Not the bond silence, but something adjacent, something careful. Two people standing in a space too small for pretense. Why were you really at our gathering? She asked. Alpha Kings don't visit marsh packs for ceremony. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Intelligence report. Your elder council has been negotiating with the Greenvale Confederacy behind closed doors. Unauthorized alliances that could destabilize the northern border. I came to observe. A pause. I stayed for a different reason. The silence deepened. not the bond silence. This was choice. This was him choosing not to fill the space with words that weren't true. The quiet, Gemma said slowly. When you walked into the firelight, everything went silent. Bram's eyes found hers. Something raw flickered there. You heard it too. I heard you. Your heartbeat. Through the silence. He exhaled. It shook slightly, and that tremor in a man who seemed built from stone made Gemma's fingers curl against the edge of the table. It's a bond, he said, quiet, careful. A silence bond. I've read about them, but never. He stopped, swallowed. I didn't come here looking for this, Gemma. I need you to know that. Her name in his mouth. Low and deliberate, like he was learning the shape of it. She felt it in her sternum. What if I don't want it? She whispered. Then you don't want it. No hesitation, no flinch. The claim protects you from Silas. It doesn't obligate you to me. If you want me gone by morning, I'll go. Gemma stared at him across the scarred table. The herbs swayed overhead in a draft she couldn't feel, and through the silence that wrapped around them, she heard his heart. Faster now. Faster than she'd thought it could go. He was afraid. The Alpha King of the Northern Reach was standing in her herb cottage, offering to walk away, and he was afraid she'd say yes. Stay, she said. For now. Stay. He stayed. 2 days passed, then 3. Bram slept on a pallet near her fire and rose before she did each morning to split kindling, quietly, like he was trying not to wake her. Though the silence between them meant she felt the moment he stirred regardless, a shift in the air. A pulse that wasn't hers, steady and warm, beginning its day. He was careful with her space, asked before touching her things, learned which jars not to move because the order mattered. On the second afternoon, she came back from gathering watercress to find he'd repaired the loose plank on her walkway, the one she'd been meaning to fix for 6 months, and said nothing about it. Just sat by the fire reading a water-stained book on marsh ecology he'd found on her shelf, his long legs stretched out, his boots drying near the hearth. She didn't thank him, but she made him tea for the first time, and when she set the cup on the arm of his chair, their fingers brushed, and the silence cracked open like a door. Sudden, total, devastating. For 3 full seconds, the only sound in the world was the shared thunder of 2 hearts. And then the noise rushed back in, and they both looked away, and neither mentioned it. He stood at the window one evening watching her grind dried chamomile with a stone pestle, and she caught him smiling. Not at her. At the competence. At the certainty of her hands. You love this, he said. It's who I am. I know, that's why I said it. The hairline crack widened. On the 3rd night, she told him about the snake bite, pushed up her sleeve and showed him the scar, thin and silvered along her inner wrist, and told him how she'd been 14 and alone in the deep marsh, how she'd cut the wound open herself and packed it with poultice she'd made from memory because there was no one else, how she'd crawled back to her cottage and spent 2 days shaking with fever, and when she emerged, no one in the pack had noticed she'd been gone. Bram listened. He didn't touch the scar, but his jaw tightened, and through the silence she heard his heartbeat change, harder, angrier, not at her. You deserved better, he said. I survived. Those aren't the same thing. Pauses. Gemma, those aren't the same thing. She kissed him. She didn't plan it. One moment she was standing by the fire with her sleeves still pushed up, and the next her hands were fisted in the charcoal wool of his tunic, and her mouth was on his. And the silence exploded. Not into noise, but into depth. Like a well she'd been looking into suddenly had no bottom. Like the quiet had been shallow before, and now it was oceanic, vast, and in it she could feel everything. His surprise, his restraint breaking, his hands coming up to cradle her face with a tenderness that made her gasp against his mouth. He kissed her back like she was the answer to something he'd stopped asking. When they broke apart, his forehead pressed to hers, his breathing unsteady. She could hear both their hearts beating in the silence, and for the first time, perfectly, impossibly, they were in sync. "Gemma," he breathed. "I know," she said. "I know." Silas made his move on the fourth morning. Gemma was collecting water mint along the shallows when she heard voices carrying across the marsh. Not through the silence bond, but through the ordinary fog. She crouched behind a stand of reeds and listened. The bloodline passes through the female line. If she mates outside the pack, we lose the healing gift entirely. Silas's voice, low and precise. Declan was the solution. The Alpha King's interference changes nothing. The claim can be contested on grounds of pack sovereignty if we present it correctly. A second voice. One of the younger elders, nervous. "Contest the Alpha King? Silas, he's one man in our territory. The formal challenge doesn't require combat if we invoke the healer's exemption. Her bloodline is classified as a pack resource. Resources cannot be claimed by outside authority." Gemma's hands were shaking. Not with fear, with fury. A pack resource. That's what she was. That's what she'd always been to him. Not a woman, not a healer. A resource. To be assigned, controlled, bred for the right traits like livestock. She thought of every mating ceremony she'd attended since she was old enough to stand in the longhouse, every assigned pair, every woman who'd smiled on the platform and gone quiet in the weeks that followed. She'd always assumed they were adjusting, settling in. Now she understood. They were disappearing, folding themselves into roles Silas had designed for them before they'd ever had a choice. Her mother had been assigned too. Gemma had never questioned it. She rose from the reeds and walked back to her cottage with the marsh water soaking through her boots and the cold climbing up her legs, and she didn't feel any of it. When she told Bram what she'd heard, she watched his face go very still. The stillness of deep water. The stillness before a storm. "He's been doing this to other women," Gemma said. "The mating assignments. They're not random, are they? He's been selecting bloodlines, pairing them, controlling which families gain power." Bram's slate blue eyes were steady. "How long? Years, maybe decades. I should have seen it sooner." "You saw it now." He reached for her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused, and when they closed around hers, the silence bloomed between them like a living thing. "What do you want to do?" Not "what should we do?" Not "here's what I'll handle." What do you want to do? "I want to stand in front of the entire pack," Gemma said, "and make them hear what I heard." Bram nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." The emergency gathering was called at dusk. The longhouse was full again, the fire pit burning high, the smoke curling up through the roof opening into a sky gone the color of bruised plums. Gemma stood in the center aisle. Not at the back near the exit this time. In the middle, where everyone could see her. Silas watched from the platform with the patience of a man who had already calculated every outcome. His son Declan sat rigid beside him, jaw working. "I heard you, Silas." Gemma's voice carried, steady, clear. She felt Bram behind her, not touching, not speaking. Just there, a wall at her back. "This morning, by the shallows. I heard you call me a pack resource. I heard you describe the healer's exemption you plan to invoke. And I heard you admit that the mating assignments have been selective, designed to consolidate bloodlines under your family's control." The longhouse went still. "This is outrageous," Silas began, rising. "The ravings of a woman who—" "Sit down." Bram's voice. 2 words. They landed like iron. Silas sat. Gemma continued. 3 years ago, Marin Ashwick was assigned to your nephew. She was a tracker. Best in the pack. Her daughter now tracks exclusively for your family's trade routes. 5 years ago, Hannah Cole, born of the River Readers, was matched with your cousin's son. Her gift now serves your fishing monopoly. The murmur that moved through the hall wasn't wind this time. It was recognition. people turning to each other with dawning understanding, with the sick clarity of a pattern finally seen. "I am not a resource," Gemma said. Her voice didn't waver. Her amber eyes burned. "I am not a bloodline to be managed. I am Gemma Birchwood, and I am the healer of this pack because I chose to be. Not because Silas Croft permitted it." She turned to face the Elder Council directly. "I call for a vote of no confidence. Pack Law, Article 12. Any member may invoke it in open gathering with cause shown." Silence. Then, from the second row of benches, an older woman stood. Maren Ashwick. Her face was pale, her hand steady. "I second it," Maren said. Then another woman stood. And another. One by one, like reeds straightening after a wind, the women of the Marsh Pack rose from their benches. Not all of them, but enough. Silas's face didn't crack, but Gemma watched the gold-topped staff tremble in his grip, watched the iron-gray eyes dart to the exits, calculating, measuring, and finding no way out. The vote carried by a margin that wasn't even close. Silas walked out of the longhouse with his staff striking the timber in a rhythm that no longer sounded like authority. It sounded like a man counting his remaining steps. Declan followed, and when he passed Gemma, she saw something she hadn't expected in his face. Not anger, not resentment, but relief. The particular relief of a man who had been carrying his father's ambitions like a stone around his neck and had just been cut free. The longhouse hummed with voices. Not fearful now, but alive. Women finding each other. Asking questions that had been swallowed for years. The sound of a pack remembering what it was supposed to be. Bram hadn't spoken again after those 2 words. He'd stood behind Gemma like a shadow, arms folded, bronze pin catching the firelight, and let her dismantle the man who'd controlled her pack for decades. When it was done, when the Elder Council began the messy, necessary work of restructuring, Bram touched the small of Gemma's back. Light, brief, a question. She leaned into it. An answer. They walked out together. The marsh was dark and silver under a half-moon. The fog had cleared for the first time in days, and the water reflected the sky like scattered mirrors. Their walkway creaked softly underfoot, and the lanterns on their poles cast warm pools of light that caught the reeds and made them glow. The silence between them was natural now. Chosen. The bond silence hummed beneath it like a bass note. Present, steady, theirs. "You didn't need me in there," Bram said. "No." Gemma looked at him. The moonlight turned his golden hair pale, turned his slate-blue eyes to silver, and she felt the ache of it in her chest. Not painful anymore. Expansive, like her ribs were making room for something too big to hold. "But I wanted you there. There's a difference." He stopped walking, turned to face her. The walkway swayed gently, and the marsh stretched out around them in every direction. Dark water, pale reeds, the distant shape of her cottage with its single lit window. "I need to say something," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it." Gemma waited. "I came here for politics, for intelligence, for the dry, practical work of keeping borders stable." Pauses. "I didn't come here looking for you. But the moment the silence fell, the moment I heard your heartbeat and nothing else in the world, I understood something I'd been getting wrong for a very long time." His hand found hers. Their fingers intertwined, and the silence deepened until Gemma could feel his pulse in her own fingertips, steady and warm, and hers. "I thought strength meant being alone, being the one who didn't need anyone." His voice was rough, quiet. "You showed me that it means standing in a room full of people who want to control you and saying no with your own voice. It means letting someone stand behind you and knowing that doesn't make you weak." Voice breaks. "I love you, Gemma. Not the healer, not the bloodline. You. The woman who packed dried yarrow in her belt this morning like she was going to war. The woman who healed her own snakebite at 14 and never once felt sorry for herself. The woman who just brought down an elder council in her bare feet." Gemma laughed. It came out wet, cracked at the edges, and she pressed her forehead into his chest, because looking at him right now was too much. Too bright, too real, too everything. "I love you," she said into the wool of his tunic. "I don't know when it started. Maybe when you split kindling without being asked. Maybe when you didn't touch my scar, but I could hear how angry you were. Maybe—" She looked up. His eyes were glassy. "Maybe when the silence fell and I heard your heart, and it sounded like coming home." He kissed her forehead, her temple, the bridge of her nose, then her mouth, slow and deep, and the silence around them wasn't empty. It was full. Full of two heartbeats in perfect rhythm, full of the marsh breathing beneath them, full of the kind of quiet that only exists when nothing is missing. "Come north with me," he murmured against her lips. "I have a cottage. Patience. Herbs that need drying. Bring all of it. I'll build you a workroom with windows that face south." "South-facing windows?" she repeated like she was testing the weight of it. The promise. The future. She'd spent so long building a life that fit inside 4 walls and a garden, so long making herself small enough to survive, that the idea of more felt dangerous, like stepping off a walkway into open water. But the water had always held her up, and this man, this impossible, patient, flower-dusted man, had never once asked her to be less than she was. And a garden. For the yarrow. Gemma pulled back far enough to look at him properly, his face in the moonlight, the bronze pin at his shoulder, the leather bracers on his arms, and the way his hands held hers like she was something precious but not fragile. "Okay," she said. "Okay." 3 months later, the marsh was frozen at the edges. Gemma stood at the window of her new workroom, south-facing just as he had promised, the glass clear enough to show the snow-dusted hills beyond the castle grounds, and crushed dried lavender between her fingers. The scent bloomed warm and purple in the winter air, mixing with the cedar smoke from the fire Bram had built before dawn. She heard him before she saw him, not his footsteps, his heartbeat. Steady, warm, approaching from the corridor with the particular rhythm she now knew better than her own, the slight acceleration when he was about to see her, the way it settled the moment he did. The door opened. Bram leaned against the frame, arms folded, watching her with that expression she'd come to recognize, the one that was too soft for a king and too fierce for anyone else. His golden hair was loose this morning, falling past his jaw, and there was flour on his forearm because he'd been attempting bread again, and he was terrible at it, and she loved him for trying. "Letter from the marsh," he said, holding up a sealed paper. "Maren Ashwick's been elected head of the new council. She wants to know if you'll come back in spring to train their apprentice healers." Gemma's amber eyes brightened. "Tell her yes." "Already did." He crossed the room, set the letter on her work table, next to the row of glass jars she'd arranged exactly the way she liked them, and which he had never once moved. His hand found the curve of her waist, and the silence bloomed between them, warm and familiar, and deep. "You smell like lavender," he murmured against her hair. "You smell like failed bread." His laugh was low, rumbling through his chest into hers. She turned in his arms and pressed her palm flat against his sternum, where she could feel both their hearts, synchronized, steady, a rhythm that had started in a smoke-filled longhouse and had never once fallen out of time. Outside, snow fell softly over the northern reach. Inside, the fire crackled. The herbs swayed in their bundles overhead, and in the silence that belonged only to them, Gemma Birchwood closed her eyes and listened to the sound of home.